Well, the president last night argued that the impeachment against him shouldn't be allowed to happen because of the mistakes that the FBI made when it launched an investigation into his 2016 campaign. Take a listen.
Think of what they did. Think of what they did. Think of how dishonest it all was. They shouldn't even be allowed to have an impeachment because it was based on dishonesty. It was based on illegality. She went out and they paid for a fake dossier.
The president there is referencing the Justice Department's Inspector General report that found that the FBI made several mistakes and omissions in applications to get surveillance warrants. CBS News senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge joins me now from Washington. So, Catherine, this week the FISA Court itself came out with a really scathing rebuke of the FBI. What did they have to say?
Well, Rena, the FISA Court, known as the FISC, which is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, is a very private and secretive institution. So when they file a 4-page order that amounts to a public rebuke of the FBI, that is a very big deal. And it's important to pay attention to the language because it does appear to go beyond what IG Horowitz said in his report, characterizing the FBI's actions as misconduct. And it continues, the frequency with which representations by FBI personnel turned out to be unsupported or contradicted by information in their possession and with which they withheld information detrimental to their case calls into question whether information contained in other FBI applications is reliable. So in layman's terms, what the FISA court is asking is whether what happened in 2016 and 2017 with the surveillance of the former Trump campaign aide Carter Page was a one-off, or whether this may be part of a broader pattern where FBI agents did not provide the full universe of intelligence to the court so they could make the best decision, Rena.
So Inspector General Michael Horowitz testified before another committee yesterday. Was there any more insight, Catherine, given on how these mistakes were made?
Well, the more we hear from Inspector General Michael E. Horowitz, Rena, I think the more we get a sense of how he has sort of two different pots of conclusions. Number one, he says that the opening or the predication of the 2016 investigation into alleged contacts between Russians and Trump campaign officials was proper and appropriate. He looked at the actions of a counterintelligence chief, Bill Priestap, so his emails, his text messages, and he saw no indications of a personal or political bias. But then Horowitz makes a very clear distinction with the FISA or surveillance warrant applications and renewals for the Trump campaign aide Carter Page. And he points specifically to these 17 inaccuracies and omissions. Let's listen to that testimony from yesterday.
As to the failures that occurred, we didn't find any of the explanations particularly satisfactory, in fact, unsatisfactory across the board. In the absence of satisfactory answers, I can't tell you as I sit here whether it was gross incompetence, and I think with the volume of errors, you could make an argument that that would be a hard sell, that it was just gross incompetence, to intentional, or somewhere in between, and what the motivations were. I can think of plenty of motivations that could have caused that to occur, but we didn't have any hard evidence that I can sit here and tell you, why did these occur? I can tell you they occurred. I can tell you we didn't get good explanations, but I can't tell you why.
But it's conceivable.
So in that testimony, that's the second time publicly we've heard from Horowitz kind of open the door to the possibility that a personal or political bias may have been at play in the FISA renewals and that initial application. To bottom line it, what he's saying is that you had 3 different FBI teams who were highly skilled, and when they withheld information from the court or there were inaccuracies, everything went to strengthen an application, which in fact was getting weaker as they learned more about Carter Page and his contacts. Rena.
You know, Catherine, it's interesting because Senator Lindsey Graham yesterday came out calling for reforms of the FISA process. I want to play for you what the senator had to say.
I want to start with the people who signed the warrant and have them explain to me why they signed it. Then I'm going to call in Christopher Wray, and I'm going to ask him, what have you done internally to make sure this never happens again? I'll get with Mike Lee and Dick Durbin and Senator Lay and others to see if we can have a bipartisan reform measure. I'm going to go to President Trump and say FISA needs to be reformed, but if possible, we need to save the ability to monitor efforts by foreign entities to influence our economy and our politics. I think there's a need for FISA, but FISA as it exists today will not be allowed to exist.
Catherine, do we know what changes Graham wants to make? And do you really see this as being bipartisan?
Well, he wants to make the case that it is bipartisan and it's much bigger than Donald Trump and the 2016 election. He says that there are significant civil liberties at play here that should really concern all Americans. To sort of bottom line it for folks at home, he's saying that we need this surveillance capability. It's a very powerful tool in the FBI toolbox. But we're really 20 years after 9/11, and we have to rethink how we're going to apply that very powerful investigative tool, especially when it impacts and targets Americans inside this country. This was an authority that was originally designed for people who were foreign inside the United States and to bust up domestic terrorism plots as well as spy rings, Rena.
So it looks like the president now, Catherine, is really focused on getting the results from the investigation by U.S. Attorney John Durham. Can you, before you go, give us sort of latest on what's going on there?
Well, we spoke exclusively with House Republican aide Kash Patel, who was really the one who kickstarted the FISA investigation, and he now works directly for President Trump. And he made the point that IG Horowitz was really a first step. It was about setting the table and laying out the fact pattern. And if there's going to be any criminal prosecutions, that's really going to be the responsibility of the U.S. Attorney in Connecticut, John Durham.
I think President Trump has a grasp on the situation. I think he sees the IG report as a crucial step to informing the public of any possible abuses, and hopefully will allow the public to read the documents themselves rather than have someone summarize what occurred. And that's the critical thing. And I think the president sees that the Inspector General is going to issue an extensive report with minimal redactions. So, you know, again, being step one, maybe step two, and then you get to U.S. Attorney John Durham, and he's been working hard for months now. So the IG, if anything, will only be able to refer matters for criminal prosecution. He won't be able to actually conduct them. But again, that's the step process that we go through. So that's why I think maybe the president's, you know, also looking at what U.S. Attorney John Durham might do.
You know, based on our reporting here at CBS News, the timeline for Durham is sometime into the new year, perhaps the early or late spring, Rena.
Okay. Thank you very much, Catherine Herridge, for joining us.